Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going on a bit of a historical deep dive. We're going to uncover the hidden story behind the rules that, well, basically run our world. And let me tell you, it's a story that goes back thousands of years, a constant struggle to bring some order to all the chaos.
So, have you ever stopped to think about this? How on earth do 195 different countries, each with its own interests, its own politics, its own agendas, how do they agree on any rules at all? It seems impossible, right? Well, the answer is this incredible idea that's been built up, torn down, and rebuilt for centuries. We call it international.
All right, so where does this whole story begin? Well, it's not in some fancy modern courtroom or at the UN headquarters in New York. Nope. We've got to go way, way back to the ancient world. This is where you find the very first seeds of these global rules being planted. By civilizations just trying to figure out the basic problem of how to get along with their neighbors.
Take the ancient Greeks, for example. They were some of the first to really wrestle with this. You had thinkers like Aristotle who came up with this idea that, okay, sure, every city-state has its own laws, but there's got to be something bigger, right? A kind of natural law. These were rules based on reason and justice that should apply to everyone, everywhere. And they were especially important for the big stuff, like how you conduct a war or make peace.
Then you've got the Romans. And if the Greeks were the philosophers, the Romans were the engineers, the pragmatists. They took these ideas and made them practical. They created something called jus gentium, which literally just means law of nations. And this was super interesting because it wasn't for Romans dealing with other Romans. No, this was a special set of rules for how Roman citizens should deal with foreigners. The whole thing was built on the idea of fairness. And man, did it have a huge influence on European law down the road.
And hey, this wasn't just a Greco-Roman thing. At the same time, you see these incredible ideas just blossoming over in the Islamic world. Legal scholars, jurists, they were developing these really sophisticated rules based on the Quran and the Hadith. And we're not talking about vague, philosophical ideas here. These were super detailed rules for how to conduct a war, how to protect civilians, even stuff like the rights of ambassadors. Really practical stuff. And it keeps going. This was clearly not some isolated thing. If you look at India, ancient texts like the Manusmriti and the Arthashastra were laying out these incredibly complex rules for diplomacy, what a king's duties were, and even what makes a war a just war. So the big takeaway here is pretty obvious, right? Long before we get to modern Europe, you've got brilliant thinkers all over the world working on the very same problem, building the first blueprints for a world with rules. So let's just pause and connect the dots here. What this all shows is that the need for rules between different groups of people, it's not a European invention. It's not a Western idea. It is a fundamentally human idea. You see it pop up everywhere, in all these different civilizations, because everyone was trying to solve the exact same puzzle. How do we stop the world from being completely chaotic?
Okay, so now let's fast forward a bit. We're jumping over to Europe, and it's a mess. A continent just racked by conflict. But out of this turmoil, a few really revolutionary things are about to happen that will basically create the foundation for the international system we live in right now.
And you can see it right here. It's this perfect storm. In a pretty short period of time, a few key things happen all at once and just completely change the game. You've got the rise of nation-states, you've got this one mind-blowing book, and you've got a single peace treaty that reshapes the continent. These three things combined, they literally forged a new world order.
And that mind-blowing book? It was by this guy, Hugo Grotius. He's really the key figure in this part of the story. His stroke of genius, and it really was genius, was to say, hey, let's separate law from religion. He argued that the rules between countries shouldn't be based on any one faith, but on reason, something everyone could share. And by doing that, he created a system that, in theory, any state could buy into, no matter what they believed. That's why we call him the father of international law.
And then, in 1648, you get the Peace of Westphalia. This wasn't just any treaty. This thing ended the ridiculously brutal 30 Years' War, and it was basically the birth certificate for the world we live in now. It laid down three huge ideas that are still at the heart of everything. Territorial sovereignty, meaning you're in charge of your own turf. Non-intervention, meaning you don't mess with other countries' internal business. And the equality of states, the idea that every country is legally equal on the world stage. Think about it. These are the exact same principles people are arguing and fighting over today. That's how important this treaty was.
All right, so the foundation is set. The big ideas are in place. The next couple of centuries, the 18th and 19th, were all about building on top of that foundation. It was time to take this stuff out of the philosophy books and turn it into actual, working legal machinery. So one of the first big jobs was to make a really clear distinction. A guy named Enlightenment Vattel was huge for this. He helped nail down the difference between international law and what we call municipal law. Think of it this way. International law is the rule book for how countries deal with each other, like a big trade deal. Municipal law is the rule book for what happens inside a single country, like your traffic laws. Getting that separation straight was absolutely critical to building a real global rule book.
And through the 1800s, that global rule book just kept getting bigger and bigger. People started hammering out specific rules for all sorts of things, how diplomats should behave, the laws of the sea, the rules of war. And here's the really important part. It stopped being just an idea. It started being taught in universities. It started being used in actual international courts. It was becoming a real practical tool that countries could actually use.
But just as this system was getting built up and formalized, it was about to get hit with the biggest test imaginable, a real trial by fire. The 20th century was just around the corner, and with it came 2 world wars that would push this whole idea of international law right to the breaking point.
After the absolute carnage of World War I, people everywhere were just screaming for a better way to do things. And the answer they came up with was the League of Nations. Now, this was a huge deal. It was the world's first real attempt to create a permanent body just to keep the peace. I mean, this was a massive step for international law, a real organization with the job of making sure countries followed the rules.
But as we all know, it didn't work. The League just didn't have the teeth. It lacked the real power and honestly the political will from its members to actually stop aggressive countries from doing what they wanted. And its catastrophic failure to prevent World War II taught the world a very, very painful lesson. Having a stronger global system wasn't just a nice idea anymore. It was an absolute necessity.
And so rising from the ashes of that second, even more terrible war, came a new plan, a new institution, one that was specifically designed to learn from all the League's mistakes and hopefully succeed where it had failed. Of course, I'm talking about the United Nations.
And the UN didn't just slap a new coat of paint on the old system. The UN Charter was a game changer. It massively expanded what international law even covered. All of a sudden, you had official protections for human rights, the beginnings of international criminal law, new systems for collective security, and really clear rules about when and how countries could use force. It was, no exaggeration, a quantum leap.
But maybe the most revolutionary change of all came out of the Nuremberg trials that followed the war. For the first time ever, this idea of individual responsibility was put into practice. What does that mean? It means the global rulebook wasn't just for countries anymore. It could now reach past the flag and the government and hold the actual people, the leaders who gave the orders, accountable for things like war crimes and genocide. This completely changed the game for international justice.
So when you step back and look at the whole story, it's pretty amazing. What started as these little seeds of fairness in ancient Greece and Rome and India and the Islamic world, well, it's gone on this incredible journey. Through centuries of diplomacy and terrible wars and trial and error, it's grown into this massive, complex, living system of laws that we all rely on to just navigate our crazy, interconnected world.
But here's the thing. This story is not over. Not by a long shot. As we've seen, the rulebook is always evolving. And the challenges we're staring down today, things like AI, cyber threats, climate change, Hugo Grotius couldn't have even dreamed this stuff up. Which leaves us with the big final question, right? What's the next chapter going to look like? What new rules are we going to have to write for our time?